John Basilone was born on November 4, 1916, in Buffalo, New York, the son of Italian immigrant Salvatore and Theodosia Basilone. His father had come from Calcenita, a mountain town east of Naples, to find work in America, and his mother had grown up in Pennsylvania before settling in Raritan, New Jersey. The family was large, lively, and modest in means, shaped by Catholic devotion and the immigrant dream that hard work and loyalty could make a better life. John, the sixth of 10 children, was restless from an early age. He was drawn to speed, muscle, and competition, always challenging the boys of his neighborhood to foot races, boxing matches, or improvised adventures along the Raritan River. When teachers described him as bright but impulsive, they were recognizing the fire that would later define him in war. As he entered his teens during the Great Depression, Basilone saw few prospects. He worked briefly as a golf caddy and truck helper, but the pull of adventure outweighed the comfort of home. At 18, he enlisted in the U.S. Army in July 1934, attracted by the promise of travel and steady pay. Assigned to the 16th Infantry Regiment, he was sent to the Philippines, where he quickly fell in love with the lush tropics, the camaraderie of soldiers, and the rhythm of military life. The island service hardened him physically and mentally. He learned to handle Browning .30 caliber machine guns, to box with brutal efficiency, and to keep his weapon immaculate under rain and mildew. Among fellow soldiers he earned the nickname Manila John, a mark of his pride and his swagger. He became known for driving trucks down muddy jungle trails and challenging any man to a bout in the regimental ring. When his 3-year enlistment ended, Basilone returned to New Jersey, but civilian life felt empty. He tried truck driving, yet every long stretch of road only reminded him of distant islands and the sense of belonging he had known in uniform. In 1940, with war spreading in Europe and tension rising in Asia, he chose to re-enlist, but this time in the U.S. Marine Corps. The Marines, he believed, were the toughest branch, the place where a man could prove himself. He completed boot camp at Parris Island, South Carolina, where instructors pushed recruits through brutal drills under the humid sun. Basilone thrived on it. He gained muscle, confidence, and the reputation of a man who could laugh under pressure. He was soon posted to Guantanamo Bay, then to Quantico, Virginia, and finally attached to the 7th Marines at the newly formed 1st Marine Division. By 1942, the United States had entered the Second World War, and the Pacific Ocean was now a vast battleground. Japan had conquered an empire stretching from Manchuria to New Guinea, and its advance threatened Australia and the American sea lanes. The first U.S. counterstrike came at Guadalcanal, a remote island in the Solomon Islands chain. There, American forces aimed to seize an unfinished Japanese airstrip, soon to be named Henderson Field, and halt Japan's expansion. In August 1942, Basilone's 1st Marine Division landed on the beaches of Guadalcanal amid rain, mud, and confusion. The jungle was dense and hostile, the heat suffocating, and disease spread faster than ammunition resupply. Japanese air attacks roared overhead daily, and naval battles thundered offshore. It was in this crucible that John Basilone would carve his legend. The Marines dug in around Henderson Field, expecting counterattacks. They were short of everything: food, artillery shells, even barbed wire, but not determination. Basilone was now a sergeant commanding a heavy machine gun section in Company C, 1st Battalion, 7th Marines, under Lieutenant Colonel Louis Chesty Puller. Puller was a legend in his own right, a stern, fearless leader whose rasping voice could be heard even in artillery fire. He recognized in Basilone a similar breed of toughness, disciplined, loyal, and resourceful. The two men would soon be bound by one of the fiercest fights of the Pacific War. In mid-October 1942, Japanese forces launched a major offensive to retake Guadalcanal. Thousands of troops under Major General Maruyama crossed the jungle toward the marine perimeter, planning a night assault to overrun Henderson Field. On October 24, torrential rain soaked the island, turning foxholes into swamps. Basilone's machine gun platoon was positioned along a ridge guarding the vital airfield. As darkness fell, eerie silence settled, broken only by the buzz of insects and the drip of water from palm leaves. Then, from the black jungle, came the metallic clatter of rifles and the shrill cries of charging soldiers. The battle for Henderson Field had begun. The first Japanese wave hit just after 10 p.m. Basilone's gunners opened fire with their Browning M1917 water-cooled machine guns, the barrels glowing red as they cut into the advancing enemy. Hundreds of figures surged through the undergrowth shouting "Banzai" and firing rifles and grenades. The Marines' defensive line erupted in a storm of lead. Basilone moved between his guns, shouting orders, clearing jams, and feeding ammunition belts. His men, soaked and exhausted, fought desperately to hold their position. When a shell burst nearby, killing one of his assistants, Basilone grabbed the ammunition boxes himself, running through the mud and tracer fire to resupply his crews. Throughout the night the attacks intensified. The Japanese came in waves, sometimes crawling through the grass, sometimes charging with bayonets. Their determination was terrifying. At one point, a grenade exploded near Basilone's gun pit, wounding his hand. He ignored it, wrapping the bleeding palm in a rag and continuing to fire. When one of his machine guns overheated and jammed, he tore it apart and replaced the barrel with his bare hands, the metal searing his skin. Hours passed like minutes. The ridge was littered with bodies, the air thick with smoke, screams, and the stench of cordite. Basilone's men were running out of ammunition. The field phone was dead, and no runners could get through. Without resupply, the line would break. At about 3 a.m., realizing that the ammunition point lay several hundred yards to the rear, Basilone made a decision that seemed suicidal. Slinging a heavy belt of cartridges across his shoulders and carrying 2 boxes in his arms, he sprinted through the darkness alone. Enemy soldiers had infiltrated behind the lines, gunfire flickered all around. Twice he dove into the mud as bullets cracked past his head. When a Japanese soldier lunged from the shadows, Basilone shot him point-blank with his Colt .45. He reached the ammunition dump, loaded up again, and ran back the same way, dodging through shell holes and corpses. His return sparked renewed hope among his crew. He distributed the ammo, reorganized the positions, and jumped back onto the gun. The Japanese renewed their assault at dawn. Hundreds more stormed the ridge, some dragging light machine guns, others crawling with satchel charges. Basilone and his remaining gunners cut them down in swaths, the barrels steaming and smoking. When his final assistant collapsed, exhausted, Basilone manned the gun alone. He fired until the last belt clattered empty, then grabbed a nearby M1919 air-cooled gun from a fallen Marine and kept shooting. His world shrank to the rhythm of the trigger, the kick of recoil, the flash of muzzle fire, the endless roar. By mid-morning, the attack ceased. The ridge was carpeted with enemy dead. Some accounts said more than 1,000 Japanese soldiers lay in front of the Marine line. Basilone's section had been reduced to a handful of survivors, but the airfield was secure. Henderson Field remained in American hands. When relief units arrived, they found Basilone sitting amid twisted guns and empty belts, his face blackened with powder, his hands raw and blistered. He refused medical evacuation until his remaining men were safe. Chesty Puller recommended him for the highest honors, stating that his courage and leadership had single-handedly saved a battalion position. For his heroism, John Basilone received the Medal of Honor, presented by Major General Alexander Vandegrift in 1943. The citation read that he fought valiantly against overwhelming forces and maintained vital defense positions by his indomitable courage and superb leadership. For the Marines, he was not only a symbol of valor but a living legend, a man who had held back an army through sheer will. After Guadalcanal, Basilone was sent back to the United States. The Marine Corps, recognizing his value as a morale figure, ordered him to participate in war bond tours across the country. Posters showed his square-jawed face and the slogan, "By war bonds, be a hero like Basilone." He appeared at parades, factories, and radio shows, always uncomfortable with the attention. While others saw a celebrity, he saw himself as a Marine who belonged with his unit. Crowds cheered, women swooned, and reporters asked about his medals, but he missed the brotherhood of combat. "I'm no hero," he would say quietly. "The heroes are the ones who never came back." Despite pleas from the Corps to stay stateside, Basilone requested to return to the front. His superiors hesitated. A Medal of Honor recipient was too valuable for propaganda to risk. Yet Basilone persisted, insisting that he wanted to train men and fight again. Finally, in late 1943, he was assigned to Camp Pendleton, California, where he trained new Marines for the next Pacific campaigns. It was there he met Lena Ridgey, a fellow Marine serving as a sergeant in the Women's Reserve. She was intelligent, composed, and immediately saw through his fame. Their courtship was brief but deep. They married in July 1944 in Oceanside, California, in a modest ceremony. Friends later recalled the gentleness in his eyes that day, the rare calm in a man otherwise built for battle. That autumn, Basilone volunteered again for combat duty, joining the 27th Regimental Weapons Company of the 5th Marine Division. His next destination would be Iwo Jima, a tiny volcanic island halfway between the Marianas and Japan itself. The island bristled with bunkers, tunnels, and artillery positions, defended by more than 20,000 Japanese troops under General Tadamaki Kuribayashi. For the U.S., capturing Iwo Jima meant securing airfields for B-29 bombers returning from raids over Tokyo. The operation was expected to last a few days. It would instead become one of the bloodiest battles in Marine history. On February 19, 1945, after weeks of naval bombardment, the first waves of Marines hit the black sand beaches of Iwo Jima. Basilone landed with them. The volcanic ash was so soft that men sank to their knees, easy targets for the guns hidden in the cliffs. Artillery and mortar fire turned the beach into chaos. Basilone rallied his men, shouting orders through the smoke. When a Japanese blockhouse pinned down an entire section with machine gun fire, he crawled forward alone, tossing grenades until he was close enough to fire his Thompson submachine gun into the slit. The bunker erupted in flames. He then guided a tank to a better firing position and helped rescue trapped Marines from under debris. Moments later, an explosion from a mortar shell struck near him. He fell instantly, killed at age 28. News of his death reached home weeks later. Lena Basilone received the telegram quietly, tears streaming as she read the words every wartime spouse feared. John Basilone was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the Marine Corps' second highest decoration, making him the only enlisted Marine of World War II to receive both the Medal of Honor and the Navy Cross. His body was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, Section 12, Grave 384. In Raritan, New Jersey, his hometown renamed its main street, John Basilone Way. Each year, on the Sunday nearest to his birthday, the town still holds a parade in his honor, the only one in America dedicated to a single Medal of Honor recipient. The story of John Basilone transcended the statistics of war. He became an emblem of the Marine Corps ethos: courage, loyalty, sacrifice. His photograph hung in barracks around the world, his name invoked during training drills as the measure of a true Marine. The men who had fought beside him remembered his grin, his gravel voice, and the quiet way he shared his rations. To them he was not a myth but a comrade who had done what duty demanded when the world seemed to collapse. Guadalcanal and Iwo Jima became chapters in the same legend, a man who faced overwhelming odds twice and never hesitated. In the months after John Basilone's death on Iwo Jima, the United States continued to push toward the Japanese homeland. The Marines who had known him spoke of him in quiet tones around campfires and in foxholes on Okinawa. They told the newcomers how he had once held off an entire regiment with 2 machine guns on Guadalcanal, how he had refused the safety of celebrity to return to the front lines. For them, his story was not just a legend, it was a standard. In an army of ordinary men facing impossible tasks, he had proven that courage was a choice made minute by minute. The image of Manila John, smiling in his field cap and holding a Browning gun, began appearing in Marine recruiting posters, and his memory spread through every training depot from San Diego to Paris Island. Lena Ridgey Basilone, his widow, continued serving in the Marine Corps Women's Reserve for a short time after his death. She refused offers to capitalize on her husband's fame. When reporters came asking for interviews, she often declined, saying softly, "He belongs to the Marines now." She kept his Medal of Honor and Navy Cross in a small box, along with his letters, which were full of affection, humor, and brief glimpses of doubt. In one, written just before the Iwo Jima landing, he had confessed, "I don't know what's waiting for us, but I can't stay away while they're out there." To her, that single sentence captured the man entirely: brave, loyal, and unable to rest when others bore the burden of war. Lena never remarried. For the rest of her life she wore her wedding ring and attended every Basilone parade in Raritan until her death in 1999. Back in Raritan, the post-war years transformed Basilone into a hometown saint. Store windows displayed his portrait surrounded by flags, the local school added his name to its facade, the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall bore his image on its sign. To the older generation, he symbolized sacrifice. To the children, he was a story told by their parents about a man who had once lived just down the street. The annual parade grew larger with every decade, drawing Marines from across the nation. When aging veterans of the 1st Marine Division visited, they stood at attention as the color guard passed, some wiping tears as the band played the Marines hymn. It was not merely nostalgia but recognition of a timeless example. In 1949 the U.S. Navy honored him by commissioning the destroyer USS Basilone, DD-824. At the launching ceremony, his father, Salvatore, broke down in tears as the ship slid into the water. For the Basilone family, it was a moment of pride mixed with sorrow, the tangible proof that their son's name would sail the oceans he had once crossed as a young soldier. The ship served for decades, participating in Cold War patrols and Vietnam operations, carrying his legacy into new generations of sailors. Each crew member who boarded was told the story of the man for whom the ship was named, a Marine who refused safety and chose duty. Among Marines, Basilone's name became part of the oral tradition, invoked during training to inspire recruits. Drill instructors would shout, "What would Basilone do?" when a platoon faltered under exhaustion. The story of Henderson Field was studied not only for its heroism but for its tactical lessons, the value of leadership, quick repair under fire, and improvisation when supplies failed. For the officers at Quantico's Marine Corps University, Basilone's stand illustrated the perfect combination of discipline and initiative, the twin pillars of Marine combat ethos. Instructors pointed out how he balanced technical mastery of his weapons with instinctive decision-making, how he placed the lives of his men above his own recognition. As decades passed, historians began to examine Basilone's deeds within the broader story of the Pacific War. Guadalcanal had been the turning point in 1942, and the defense of Henderson Field marked the moment when Japanese offensive momentum was finally broken. Scholars described the battle as the night when the fate of the Pacific hung in the balance. In that context, Basilone's action assumed monumental significance. Without his machine gun section holding that ridge, the Japanese might have overrun the airfield, destroying American aircraft and supply lines. His courage, therefore, was not only personal but strategic. It helped secure the first decisive Allied victory against Japan. When he later returned to die on Iwo Jima, his life formed a complete arc: 2 battles, 2 islands, both vital to the Allied advance. Cultural memory reshaped him into the archetype of the American fighting man: humble origins, extraordinary courage, devotion to comrades. Magazines in the 1950s printed serialized accounts of Guadalcanal, always mentioning his name. Hollywood, fascinated by war heroes, produced films that drew loosely from his story. The 1960 movie The Gallant Hours referenced his stand, and later documentaries restored the true details. Yet Basilone's legend remained curiously pure. Unlike many wartime figures whose fame faded or became politicized, his reputation endured unblemished. He had asked for nothing, claimed no superiority, and died before the disillusionment that sometimes follows victory. That innocence of purpose gave his story lasting power. For the Marines who served in later conflicts, Korea, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, Basilone's example continued to resonate. Recruits at boot camp still learn of him during the long marches and obstacle courses that test endurance. The culminating challenge at Marine Corps Recruit Depot San Diego is called the Crucible, and one of its stations bears his name. At that point, exhausted and sleepless, young Marines crawl under barbed wire, haul ammunition cans, and recite aloud the stories of Medal of Honor recipients. When they reach Basilone, instructors remind them that courage is not a burst of glory but a sustained refusal to yield. His ghost, in that sense, still walks beside every Marine who shoulders a weapon. Historians have also studied his leadership style. Unlike officers trained in academies, Basilone rose from the enlisted ranks. He led by example rather than command. At Guadalcanal he never shouted from behind but moved among his men, sharing their danger. His discipline was absolute, but his humor kept morale alive. Survivors recalled that he cracked jokes even as shells exploded nearby, telling a gunner who missed a reload, Don't worry, he ducked anyway. This ability to humanize horror made his men fight harder, not out of fear but out of loyalty. Modern military psychology later described this as horizontal leadership, peer-based influence that can hold a unit together under chaos. Basilone embodied it instinctively. His Italian-American heritage added another dimension to his legend. During a time when many immigrant communities still faced prejudice, his heroism became a symbol of belonging. Italian-American newspapers proudly declared, "Our John Basilone fights for America." Communities from Boston to San Francisco organized commemorations, linking his name with patriotism and integration. He represented how immigrant families, once viewed as outsiders, had become central to the nation's defense. The statue erected in Raritan in 1948 shows him not as a distant monument but as a neighbor, bareheaded, sleeves rolled up, rifle at rest, capturing both humility and strength. As time advanced into the new millennium, his story experienced a revival through literature and film. The 2010 HBO miniseries The Pacific introduced Basilone to millions who had never heard of Guadalcanal. Actor John Seda portrayed him with a balance of toughness and vulnerability, showing the moral burden of survival and the longing to return to war. The series depicted his bond with Lena, his frustration during the Bond tours, and his final moments on Iwo Jima. Veterans praised the portrayal for its authenticity. Younger viewers, accustomed to digital warfare and distant conflicts, rediscovered the raw humanity of a man who fought face-to-face, often at arm's length from the enemy. After the show aired, enlistment inquiries reportedly increased, many recruits mentioning his name on their forms. Yet beyond the myth and media, Basilone's enduring appeal lies in something quieter: integrity. In every letter, photograph, and eyewitness account, there is no trace of arrogance. When offered the chance to remain home, he declined not out of recklessness but principle. He believed leadership meant sharing the same risks as those he trained. In one conversation before Iwo Jima, a fellow Marine asked why he would return when he had already done enough for his country. Basilone simply answered, "Because they still need me." Those 4 words echo through Marine Corps halls more powerfully than any slogan. Iwo Jima itself became sacred ground for the Corps. The volcanic island remains under Japanese administration, but American and Japanese veterans occasionally meet there for remembrance ceremonies. Among the thousands of graves at Arlington National Cemetery, visitors often seek out Basilone's marker. It is simple: name, rank, dates, and the inscriptions Medal of Honor and Navy Cross. Veterans leave coins on the stone, a Marine tradition symbolizing respect. A penny means you visited, a nickel means you trained with him, a dime means you served with his unit, and a quarter means you were there when he fell. His grave rarely lacks coins. Every generation reinterprets heroism, but Basilone's version remains strikingly unmodern and yet eternally relevant. He was not a man of ideology or grandeur. He did not seek conquest or revenge. His actions were rooted in a simple creed: to protect the man next to him and accomplish the mission entrusted to him. In a century increasingly cynical about war, such clarity feels almost otherworldly. That is why his story endures not just in Marine barracks but in classrooms, museums, and local libraries. Teachers use his example to explain courage, parents use it to speak of service, filmmakers use it to explore sacrifice. In personal terms, those who knew him best remembered a man who loved laughter, dancing, and the simple things: good food, boxing, driving fast cars. Friends from Raritan recalled how he would sing Italian songs at family gatherings, how he carried himself with quiet confidence rather than swagger. He wrote home about missing a decent cup of coffee and teasing his younger brothers about baseball. Even in wartime letters, humor persisted: "Tell Pop to keep the truck running, I might be home to borrow it again." These glimpses remind readers that heroism often comes from ordinary men who never expected monuments. They step forward because conscience leaves no alternative. The meaning of his sacrifice deepened as decades of peace followed. Veterans returning from Vietnam and later wars sometimes visited the Basilone Parade, finding solace among those who still remembered. The parade became less about the past than about continuity, each generation acknowledging the price of the uniform. Children carried small flags, and Marines in dress blues marched with silent precision. When the color guard halted before his statue, the town fell silent. Then the bugler played taps, the notes rising over the Raritan River. For an instant, it felt as though time folded, and John Basilone stood among them again, smiling in that familiar way, unpretentious and calm. In military academies, his legacy is now discussed alongside great commanders, though he never rose beyond sergeant. Leadership manuals cite his decisions at Guadalcanal as case studies in adaptive tactics. One lesson often highlighted is his ability to act without waiting for orders, a quality modern doctrine calls mission command. When communications failed, he assessed, decided, and acted, keeping the larger goal in mind. That instinct saved not only his men but possibly the entire campaign. In this sense, Basilone anticipated principles that the Marine Corps would formally adopt decades later. He also left an emotional template for what Marines call esprit de corps. His devotion to comrades illustrated that the bond between soldiers transcends rank, background, and even survival. Many who fought with him admitted that they were terrified that night on Guadalcanal, but seeing Basilone running through gunfire made them believe the impossible could be done. That faith, the conviction that one man's courage can multiply through others, became central to Marine identity. His life, therefore, was not only an individual saga but a collective inheritance. In a broader cultural sense, Basilone's story bridges the gap between myth and reality. Every nation constructs heroes, but few withstand the scrutiny of time as he has. Part of that endurance comes from the tragic symmetry of his life, a hero who survived one hell only to meet another. It is the classic pattern of the warrior's journey, tested, exalted, and ultimately sacrificed. Yet Basilone's ending carries no sense of futility. The airfield secured because of men like him shortened the war and saved countless lives. His death, though heartbreaking, sealed his immortality in the tradition of the Marines, where deeds speak louder than survival. As the 21st century advances, technology changes the face of warfare, but the essence of courage remains the same. Marines deploying to modern conflicts still hear Basilone's name during their briefings. His story appears in digital training modules, podcasts, and motivational videos. In 2022, the Marine Corps announced a new destroyer to be named USS John Basilone, DDG-122, the second vessel to bear his name, ensuring that generations yet unborn will learn it. During the christening ceremony, a descendant of his family remarked, "He fought for those beside him, not for glory. That's what makes him eternal." The ship's motto, engraved on its crest, reads, "Honor, Courage, Commitment, the Basilone Legacy." In the end, the measure of John Basilone's life is not the number of enemies he defeated or medals he earned but the spirit he left behind. He showed that heroism is not a single act but a way of living, disciplined, humble, selfless. From the muddy ridge of Guadalcanal to the black sands of Iwo Jima, he walked a path few could endure, yet he did so without bitterness or boast. When the night was darkest, he stood his ground. When fame tempted him to safety, he returned to danger. When death came, he met it doing the only thing he believed in, leading from the front. Long after the gunfire faded, his story continues to remind a restless world that courage, at its truest, is quiet, steadfast, and profoundly human.